So, Jotaka, what's your go-to hymn or song with all the things going around? Like, what kind of centers you?
I Understand is my song right now.
Oh, really? I Understand?
Yeah, by
Okay.
Snooki Norfolk.
Okay. Yeah. So I've listened to a lot of interviews that you've done. You've been everywhere. I mean, I just want to give you a chance to define who is Jotaka Eaddy. When you think and sit back in your quiet moments, who are you?
Well, I think I always start with just not necessarily who I am, but whom and whose I am. Mm-hmm. And I'm always think of myself, I'm a child of South Carolina. I am a Black woman who grew up on a dirt road in South Carolina. So, and I say that all the time because it's so much of who I am. Like that dirt road, or the representation of what dirt roads mean to so many people, particularly Black women who grew up in the South or places that didn't have much. But the thing that is so constant is the love, the support, and particularly that of older Black women and men, but particularly Black women in my community. So when I think about who is Jotaka Eaddy, a lot of whom and whose is Jotaka Eaddy often comes to me. And so I think about that. And then I'm a businesswoman, a connector, but most importantly, I just think of myself as someone just trying to make the world a little bit better.
Take us back to that first moment in your life where you remember understanding what it is to be an activist and thinking, I want to do that. Was there a point in time you're 5 or 6 years old and you're like, you see an injustice on the playground and you're like, you can't do that, and here's why? Like, where did this come from?
So I've had like a number of those moments. So
do you remember the first one?
One of the earliest was an inspiration. Reverend Jesse Jackson came to my small hometown, Johnsonville, South Carolina. We have like population, I think it's population 1,400, 91 people. And Reverend Jesse Jackson came because the local industrial plant, the workers were striking. Mm-hmm. And if you can imagine, Reverend Jesse Jackson coming to a town of 1,400 people and marching from the plant to the high school field where he did a big speech.
What year was this?
Oh gosh, I may have been like 8th grade.
Okay.
Not 8th grade, sorry, 8 years old. I may have been 8 years old, 9. Okay. And I just remember when Reverend Jesse Jackson came, I remember seeing him and thinking, oh my goodness, this is powerful. And I just felt something at that young age because I was seeing workers stand up, who many of them were family members or they went to my church. So those were the people on strike. So I didn't really understand what the strike was, but I understood they were fighting for something. And I remember Reverend Jesse Jackson, I can still see him. Like I can see him standing on the football field. He had all black on. And I remember he said, look at somebody and say, I am somebody. And I just remember like looking over the fence and just thinking like, this is amazing.
You worked with the NAACP or NAACP, I know as the old folks will call it. Tell us sort of there where you got a lot of experience and understanding of sort of where you are now when it comes to connecting people and the power that our vote has.
Yeah, the NAACP is and was and continues to be a very important part of my development, my growth, and who I am. If you think about the NAACP, which has been around since 1909, fighting for civil rights and advocacy in a very real way in community across the country. And so being at the NAACP, what I learned, and I was a part of the NAACP as a young person. So I was in the youth council of the NAACP. I was in NAACP in college, but working in the headquarters, what you see and witness firsthand is the fight for justice. You see injustice straight on. Like I remember being in Florida during the time of the murder of Trayvon Martin. I remember first meeting Sabrina Fulton, who I've had the blessing of knowing for many years now, but I was there. I've seen that. I've seen the attack on voting rights firsthand. I've seen injustice, but I've also seen where the work and the focus and the advocacy can actually turn that around. And that's been the power. And then seeing folks in the NAACP, like a Dr. Hazelyn Dukes and or other leaders like a Rosalind McAllister Brock or a contemporary Reverend Siobhan Arline Bradley, who now leads NCNW, like women like that whom have shaped the NAACP in many ways, and continue to, and to just see and be inspired by the fruit of that work. And so the NAACP for me was really an opportunity to be on the front lines, but also to learn something that is so valuable, is that the work is always with the people. And the work always has to center the people who are closest to the pain.
You make a detour to Silicon Valley. What did you learn there? How did that shape you in terms of what you're able to do today?
Well, that was very interesting. I'm laughing. I'm thinking about like, what I went. So the interesting part about Silicon Valley is that I was reluctant. Like I was like, I don't see myself there. I was happy at the NAACP. I was like, hey, I am doing the people's work. And I had this misconception when I was recruited into Silicon Valley that going into business and or shifting out of day-to-day civil rights advocacy was an abandonment of my values in some way. And the biggest lesson that I learned is that you can be an advocate in any environment because there's work to do in all sectors. Like, the work to advance justice in this country doesn't just live in civil rights. It's in business, it's in sports, it's everywhere, because injustice, it doesn't stop across a certain business sector or a certain sector in this country. And so when I got over my own imposter syndrome or feeling like this wasn't a place for someone like me, I realized that not only was there a need for people like me who had experience in NAACP, and at the time I had worked on a landmark Supreme Court case, I lobbied in the UN, I'd helped change state constitutions, but I still didn't see a reflection of myself. And so I was hesitant. And once I went in, I realized, yes, we need to be there because these companies not only are marketing and or building products that impact our communities, but the entire future of the country. And if we're not at the table, as the old saying is often, if you're not at the table, you might just be on the menu. And it's important for us to be at the table, and also it's important for us to be in areas of business. And that was like the biggest lesson once I went into the industry, is that we, as particularly Black women, we have to be everywhere.
Then you learn a lesson you talk about with wanting to do more and calling a mentor and being frustrated by what you're seeing happening across the country. Take me back to what you were feeling when you said, what can we do? What should be done? And the person who said, I'm waiting on you. You tell me.
Yeah, that's Mignon Moore. Yeah. She, like other Black women like her, have been such a constant in my life, both in my career and when I've had the most daunting personal challenges. And so, just the mention of her name, it just takes me to just thinking about how particularly Black women mentors and friends will show up for you, whether it's in your career or your personal life. And so I go back to 4 years ago. It was August. It was in the middle of COVID. And I went to South Carolina to hunker down with my family for a bit. And I was like, well, if the places I could be most safe from COVID is probably on a dirt road in a town of 1,400 people. So I went to South Carolina. And the conversation and the narrative in the country was really one surrounding the vice presidential pick. Who was then Vice President Biden going to select? And he had said it was going to be a woman. And Black women who had been pushing and meeting, for a very long time with Vice President Biden at the time and others making very clear that it needed to be a Black woman. And once that happened, if you could imagine, all the media conversations started talking about these potential Black women, whether it was then Senator Kamala Harris or Representative Val Demings,
I think Susan Rice was
Susan Rice,
mentioned.
Karen Bass, Stacey Abrams. All of these names had been they were talking about these women. But every last one of those women were receiving racist, sexist attacks. No one was challenging their policies, their agendas. She was too ambitious. They were trying to pit them against each other. And so I was just watching this, not just myself, but other Black women were seeing this too. And I was sitting there thinking, whoa, all of these attacks on these women, what happens if every last one of them, the character assassination of these women who are all being named as potential vice presidential contenders? So even the ones that might not make it, but if they all been character assassinated their character, what happens to their ability to become a cabinet secretary or the president of a university? So one, it was just thinking about what happens to those women. And I remember calling Mignon, and I was like, Mignon, what are y'all gonna do? Meaning, the political aunties, the Donna Brazils, the Mignons, the Yolandas, the Tanyas. What are y'all gonna do? And Mignon just was like, well, what are you gonna do? What are y'all gonna do? And she meant, my generation. Like, what are y'all gonna do? And basically she said, you go do something and we'll stand with you. Mm-hmm. And I remember just sort of kind of like thinking, oh Lord, I got gathered by Mignon Moore, which is a beautiful thing.
So for those who don't know the word gathered by, she got you all the way together.
She got me all the way together.
Okay. But help us, understand the mindset of when you have an idea and you act on it.
Yeah, it was, the email was it was like some ranting. I was upset. But it was also like, I'm a strategist. So like my day-to-day, part of who I am, I'm a strategist and a connector. So here I am. And I had, by this time, I had been in these different worlds. I had been in Silicon Valley. So I had a lot of business relationships in Silicon Valley. I've been in politics. So I've got those relationships. Of course, the colored girls are holding, holding me down and saying they're supporting. And so if you look at the people who I emailed, it was just a wide array. So it wasn't just political, it was people in entertainment. And my email just said, I remember the topic was not on our watch, this VP narrative. We must act. I think that was kind of the subject.
So you're leveraging all your contacts and you put out this note, and then what happens?
I think it wasn't 30 seconds. I believe Yolanda Caraway was the first, the right, I'm in, I'm there. Donna Brazil, and everyone, all of these women just started writing back and saying, exactly, this is a problem, we gotta do something. And my email just basically outlined it. It just said, in short, it just said, not on our watch. This narrative, we have to do something about it. And if something is already happening, let me know and I will join the forces. If not, let's just get on a call. Let's get a hashtag. Let's maybe put out a letter. Let's just figure out action, because we cannot not push back on this narrative.
So this starts in August of 2020. Where did the name come from?
Win with Black Women came from we were on a call, and as a group, we were like, we need a name, we need a hashtag. I remember we were like, we need a hashtag. This is 2020, right? So this is like when the hashtag was a thing. It's like, we need a hashtag. Interestingly, who was also a part of this coming up with the hashtag was Dr. Jonetta Beshcole. So if you could just imagine, a call from a Dr. Hazelyn Dukes and a Dr. Jonetta Beshcole to a Celia McFadden, who was I think she was a sophomore at Howard University. This is the range. Okay. And so as a group, we were just thinking about different hashtags. Was it not on our watch? And we came up with Win with Black Women, because the notion is that we can win with Black women in that particular election. America wins with Black women. We win when we're together. We win when we're united. And so that's how Win with Black Women was was born. And that first night we got on the call, it was 90 of us. The people who were on the email got on, and then they invited friends.
And this is every Sunday?
And it started, and the first night we decided we're going to do an open letter. And a few of us stayed up until I think about 5 a.m. We wrote this open letter. We put it back out to the 90 people who were on the call. That same night, I think we sent the email like, "Thank you, sisters. Here's the open letter. Sign it." And within 48 hours, we had over 2,500 signatures to that letter. And then the sisters were like, "Well, we can't stop with just saying we have to do something about this narrative, but we also need to follow in the footsteps of Black women who were calling for a meeting with then Vice President Biden, saying it should be a Black woman, and saying collectively we are going to join those efforts and say very loudly that it was time for there to be a Black woman on the ticket."
When you think about the history of this country, how do you think Black women have historically become at the forefront of getting out the vote? We're going to be interviewing an author, Martha S. Jones, later for this piece to talk about that, because it's not new. When you go back to the church, when you go back to schools, you think of Shirley Chisholm. There's a history there and a blueprint of, I am enough, I'm capable. Maybe not at that time, but there were so many people that have laid the groundwork. So can you give us sort of your take on just historically what have Black women represented when it comes to getting out the vote?
Yeah, I think about, as you say that, I think, ain't I a woman? Sojourner Truth, who dared to stand up and say, ain't I a woman? Like, fighting for the place of Black women. You think about the history of the Divine Nine, and the history of members of the Divine Nine consistently since all of them, all over 100 years of Black women fighting for social justice, fighting. My sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, first public action, marching for the right to vote down Pennsylvania Avenue. So years and years and years. And so then you look at Mary McLeod Bethune, you look at Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan. And I think that when you think about why were Black women always doing this, is out of necessity. It was never, yes, it was this notion that we want to do for our community and our service, but it's a necessity for the very, dignity of our families, our lives, and the people that we most care about, and our communities. And so Black women have, I believe, acted because we had no other choice. I think that's the same thing that we're seeing in this current election.
The third week of July happens. President Biden announces that he is stepping down, and then he says he's going to throw his support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. Where were you, and did you think in that moment instantly, everything I've been doing is about to come full circle?
Ironically, I was on my dirt road in South Carolina at my parents' house. It is full circle that I happened to have been there on that day. I just was home that weekend visiting my parents, and I remember sitting on the porch, and there had been conversations, as you know, and it's important to know that Black women were standing with President Biden. Melanie Campbell, a great leader, had wrote an open letter, and 8,000 Black women had signed on to that letter saying that we were in full support of the Biden-Harris ticket. And should the president, and it should be only his decision, decide that he was going to step aside, that Vice President Kamala Harris was the only conversation that Black women were going to even entertain. And so, but we were very clear that President Biden, Black women, we weren't abandoning the Biden-Harris ticket. And so, and I think that was so important because President Biden, and I think it's important just to note that he has seen Black women in every step of his entire administration. From his selection of the Vice President Kamala Harris, to the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court, more Black women on the federal bench than we have seen any other president put on the bench. Numerous Black women in key strategic decision-making places throughout his administration, whether it's budget, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, whether it's Department of Housing and HUD, all across his administration, but also numerous policies, student debt relief, that has a great impact on Black women, focus on maternal health. And so this administration had never abandoned, and this president had never abandoned Black women. And so when he did make his decision, I think many of us, including myself, thought, wow, like what a remarkable sacrifice for a sitting president who is the presumptive nominee to make.
Right.
And for him, within 15 minutes, endorse Vice President Kamala Harris was for, I think, all of us in that moment. I think my phone is, my text messages going off.
Who was your first, I was going to say, who was your first phone call? Who was your first text to when you learned that Biden was endorsing Harris?
It was a group, so I'm on a group text. So if you can imagine, it's a group text. So when with Black women, we had now been meeting for 4 years, and we've done all kind of things in those 4 years, you know, from working to support the WNBA when it was the important work around Brittany Griner in this country, or working to support Black women in entertainment and the film industry. But we had a Sunday call scheduled. And interestingly, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Donna Brazile, they were all on the agenda already. And we were going to talk about the election, but we really were talking about our Black women continuing to support the Biden-Harris ticket because we saw what was happening.
That was on the agenda.
Yeah, that was on the agenda. An agenda had already been sent as saying that there was going to be a call.
So now you had a new agenda.
And we knew we had to change the agenda.
Yeah.
We had to change the agenda. And Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, I joke with her every time I see her now. It's like, move over, Babe Ruth, is Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, because she was doing a television interview. And she said, I'm going to get on a call tonight, and it's going to be 18,000 Black women. Now, when with Black women, our Zoom settings was in meeting format, which the max is 1,000 people.
And that was on average how many you were getting between that time when you started it? Would you say
hundreds
or
hundreds,
close to 1,000 here and there?
More hundreds. Then if there was, of course, a bigger name that people were super interested in the conversation, we would get up to maybe 1,000. But that's the max that you can get on a Zoom meeting format. So when she made the comment, I'll never forget, her chief of staff reached out and was like, oh, the Congresswoman said that there was going to be 18,000 people on your call tonight. I just want to give you a heads up. And I just joked, and I was like, well, it's only 1,000 could be on there. So we're not worried about it. But my immediate planning was, we should plan to have, for 1,000 people. So let's just make sure we don't go over the max, so that we keep about 25 slots in case somebody's late and we've got to let them in as a speaker or something like that for the call tonight. Because we knew that the conversation was going to be about this historic moment. And I remember that in that interview that the Congresswoman did, I think the anchor kind of came back and said, 18,000. And then she comes back and she doubled down and she says, 30,000. It's going to be 30,000 of us on the call. And still... We
will make sure we pull this tape.
So you have to find... I think we can probably find this. And so I'm like laughing to myself only because it's just like, okay, like it's... I was like, I just love Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. She just, she's always on fire. So it was just like this kind of like...
You didn't really think that many people would show up.
No.
But in fact...
So I knew something was up because, that group text that we were on, we were texting back so much. I remember saying, we should hop on a Zoom, y'all. And I said, well, we could use my Zoom line. Right. So I just sent them the Win with Black Women Zoom line because we had been using the same Zoom line for the last 4 years. The same Zoom line the last 4 years, most Sundays at 8:30. And so I sent that number because it just was easy. So we were on there just kind of like talking, just talking, processing what's happening. And I started to notice there was 70 it kept creeping, 60 women in the waiting room. And this was like, I think maybe like 4:30, 5 o'clock. Call is not until 8:30. And I remember sending a note to the waiting room and saying, hey, the call isn't until 8:30, so we'll see y'all at 8:30.
Right.
You know, just in my mind, like, well,
They were anxious.
They were ready. They were ready. And I kind of, it sort of like was like, but it still didn't register by that time. And then, so you fast forward, and it's about 8 o'clock. Generally, there's a team of volunteers, and we generally get on the call about 8 to open up the call and just get ready, you know, to make sure we're all set for the call at 8:30 so that we can just get on. And it's a meeting format. So it's like, for the last 4 years, it'd be Black women, and you can mute, unmute yourself, but we're, you know, very much a real collective. And at 8 p.m., I could not get on my own Zoom. And I was like, I can't get on. It says it's at capacity. And I remember I was like, well, I'm the administrator. I own the Zoom account, so let me go in the back end to see can I get in. And it's like, oh, Zoom, you can't get on if it's over capacity. Like, not even the administrator could get on. And I remember sending an email to the listserv, which at the time was about 5,000 to 6,000 people on the listserv. And we were like, oh, goodness. And I went and looked at my Zoom settings, and my Zoom settings was for, in webinar form, I could go up to 3,000. And I was like, okay, so we first tried to get women to hang up, because we were like, hey, could a few of you hang up so that Jotaka can get on, or so that Holly could get on, so that we could kind of do the controls. And it was not happening. We had no idea how many people, you know, were trying to get on.
Wow, so this is all happening
in real time.
The day of the 90,000.
Yes, all in real time.
So how did we get to 90,000? How did you work it out?
So, Black women. So so here we are, 8 o'clock. By 8:30-ish, 8:30, 8:40-ish, it's like, okay, nobody's hanging up. We said we could switch it to webinar.
Okay.
So then we send an email to the listserv, 4 to 5, it's about 5,000 to 6,000. No, nothing on social media, it's just 5,000 to 6,000 people on a listserv, a Google group, and a small MailChimp account. And we said, hey, use this link, we've moved to a webinar. And I just thought, okay, we'll be fine, and then we could just kind of go on with our meeting. And it'll be probably a little bit more, it's probably maybe 1,500, 2,000 people. The minute we opened the webinar, boom.
3,000.
3,000. And so I was like, oh, goodness, we're at capacity again. Still no concept of how many. Someone gave out my phone number, because my phone number is for the last 4 years. It's at the end of every Win with Black Women email. So it's like, oh.
Easy to find.
Easy to find. And my phone rang probably about 500. I had about 500 missed phone calls, because it just kept ringing to the point I had my...
Did you screenshot that, just for the record?
I think I might have. But my parents were there, because I'm in South Carolina. And I remember having my parents stand at my phone and just hit ignore, because it's just going. Bzz, bzz,
so everybody's working.
So
now.
like everybody's working. So like we're trying to do it, and then at the same time, if you could imagine, and this is like the beauty of Black women, like all volunteers, right? This core group of Black women who are simultaneously, we're trying to host a webinar, so moderating a webinar, at the same time getting the speakers who were regularly scheduled to be on the call, speaker links now, because you have to have a speaker link to be for a webinar, because everybody's just watching now.
What time is it at this point?
This is maybe 8:45.
So you're doing a lot of this very quickly then.
All of this is happening in real time. At the same time of, like, I think I was hosting the call. So it's like, and next up we have Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. And so like we shifted the agenda to talk about this moment. What does this mean? Break it. Bishop Leah Daughtry, can you break down what's happening? You know, how do we feel? And then all of these women were just, who had been a part of Win with Black Women for so many years, whether it was, you know, Dr. Bernice King, who would join our calls from time to time, were calling in presidents of the Divine Nine in their personal capacities, of course. All were calling in just to just be in this moment, because one, we were joyful. We wanted to get informed because we wanted to understand the process, and we knew we had to get to work. And so that's what we were doing all in real time. And then there was a sister who had been a part of the network who was just kind of no one asked her, she just knew something needed to be done. And so she reached out to a friend, executives at Zoom, because she works in business. So somehow Zoom then goes into the back end of my account in real time and give us the ability to, in real time, open up and expand our call.
No limits.
I think it may have had 50,000.
Okay.
And so if you could imagine, by that time, Black women had self-organized outside of Zoom. So there were... Clubhouse had 30,000. There was there was a sister who had a conference call line. She had 10,000 people on it. People were putting their phones. It was on Instagram Live, Twitch, outside, listening into that call that night. And we stayed on until 1 a.m. And when we hung up at 1 a.m., it was still 20,000 women. And it felt like a hug that you just did not want to let go. And I remember the hardest thing for me was hitting end meeting for all, because we had celebrated, we had been informed, we were committed, that it was, you just felt this sense of unity, but also this sense of renewed purpose of the work that we knew we had to do moving forward, but with a respect and a homage to the work that came before us. So there's a lot of emotion.
With this attention has come criticism. We're not a monolith. How do you handle the criticism from within with Black women who say, wait a minute, I am going to vote another way because of policy? I've talked to voters who said, Black and white, oh, you can't listen to what Trump says. Look at his policies. Look at where I'm better off in terms of financially, the price of food, the price of a house, all of these things gone up, immigration. How do you answer the criticism from Black women who disagree with you?
Well, first of all, it's a level of respect of, we respect the viewpoints of anybody. Everybody has a right to their viewpoints. And my grandmama used to always say, you can't save everybody. You can't save everybody. And there's some people, they're just not ever going to, they have a difference of opinion. But what I do know is that the work that we do and the work that we are doing will benefit them. They'll definitely be benefited, because sometimes many of them are voting against their own self-interest. And if that's what they want to do, then that's their position. But what I do also know is that when you hear that criticism about let's not pay attention to Trump, I think that's very dangerous.
As we sit here with less than 3 weeks before Election Day, what does Win with Black Women look like? What are you all doing? And how do you keep that momentum from July 21st to November 5th?
Win with Black Women, there's still Sunday night calls, Sundays at 8:30. Everyone is welcome to those calls now. And there's still, on average, anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 women on a Sunday night call, and thousands more watching the YouTube replay of the call. But the work is squarely focused on where we have to be focused, is in our communities. That's where the work is. There are more than 23 local, state organizing collectives across the country, from Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, other places across the country, where Black women are organizing every day, phone banks, getting out the vote, and working in partnership and coalition with Black women-led organizations as a part of a collective of Black women in a what we call a Black women's leadership collective, but Black women working together to make sure that we are reaching voters, that we're in our communities, being those trusted messengers that we are. And that's our focus for the next 3 weeks. You've got to, the way you win an election, I firmly believe, as an organizer and as someone who comes from the school of the NAACP, you win an election in the field. That's where you win it. You win it in communities, talking to voters and meeting them where they are. And that's what Win with Black Women, that's what other Black women organizations and Black women as individuals are squarely focused on.
You've obviously done a lot of work and have been doing the work for a while now. If Harris doesn't win, do you take responsibility for that? Should Black women be held accountable?
You know, every time people ask me about this notion of if she doesn't win, I would say that's not an option. It's just simply not an option. And so I don't think about those scenarios much because I think Black women around this country is squarely focused on that's just not an option. And I think when the story is told, I hope it's not just what Black women did in this moment, it will be how we did it in this moment. We did it in joy, we did it in love, we did it with our brilliance, we did it with focus, and we did it in a way that was centered truly in what was built and instilled and passed down to us for generations and generations. We did it in legacy. And I think that is what is going to be the important story, not just the what happens, but how we did it and what that will do for the future.
Which is?
I think it will set a new standard. It will set a new standard built upon the work, the hard work, the labor, the love that has been passed on for Black women for generations and generations.